In February 2024, a joint operation between the Chinese Coast Guard and the People's Liberation Army began encirclement patrols of Taiwan Islands Kinmen, Matsu, and Dongyin. The Chinese called this a military police action. The purpose of this action was to patrol the area and stop, board, inspect and warn, and expel vessels traveling to these islands. This is called the Kinmen Model. On May 14th, 2024, this Kinmen Model was formally expanded to include patrols, boardings, and inspections of vessels in the Taiwan Strait. It is necessary to understand how the Chinese Coast Guard is different than any other Coast Guard in the world to fully appreciate the impact this new gray zone area of naval operation will have. Let's go back to 2018 for a moment. The Chinese Coast Guard was transferred from State Council Command to the People's Armed Police Force under Central Military Command. And in 2021, a new Chinese Coast Guard law was enacted. Let's begin with Article 3 of the Chinese Coast Guard Law. It says that the Chinese Coast Guard shall operate in maritime areas under Chinese jurisdiction. At no point in this law does it say where those jurisdiction borders or boundaries begin and end. And that is a geographical gray zone China intends to exploit, pushing their Coast Guard further and further out to conduct these operations. We've already seen an expansion between February and May of this year to just the coastline of China mainland to the entire Taiwanese Strait, and I believe it's going to go even further. But what should alarm you is further down in the law, in Article 21 and below, it says the Chinese Coast Guard has the authority to forcibly evict foreign military vessels. Now, if we just limit this to the Taiwan Strait, there is an international waterway between Taiwan and China's mainland. By including or expanding this operation into that body of water, that is a direct conflict with the Convention of Law on the Sea, allowing freedom of navigation and peaceful passage of shipping, both civilian and warships, in international waters. So already we're beginning to see a legal conflict between what China has enacted in 2021 and to what has been the law on the sea for many, many years. It continues that the Chinese Coast Guard will use all necessary measures, including weapons, to prohibit the passage of vessels, and it will do so in accordance with orders given by the Central Military Commission. This law gives the Chinese Coast Guard the authority to use lethal force on shipping and foreign military vessels to prohibit their passage in maritime areas under Chinese jurisdiction. A Chinese jurisdiction, a maritime area that is not defined in the law that gives them this authority. So right now, China has the largest Coast Guard in the world, and it's under command by all of these officers that you see here on your screen who were formal PLA officers, PLA Navy officers, that facilitate communication between the Central Military Command and the Chinese Coast Guard now. So there's further and further dilution of what is military and what is Coast Guard. What units fall under, military rules of war and enforcement, and what are legal actions. There's a blending of these types of commands. There's less and less clear a distinct line into how they're legally allowed to perform. So all we have is this law from 2021 that is active right now that allows the legal use of weapons against foreign military vessels by the Chinese Coast Guard. And with the Kinmen model being expanded into the Taiwan Strait, it could happen there right now. So in May 2024, Joint Sword 2024, a naval exercise with the PLAN, that's the Chinese Navy, and the Chinese Coast Guard exercises a joint operation around Taiwan. They did this again in 2022. This is a follow-on from that, more of a refined demonstration of force around the island. But what's different about 2024 is the Chinese Coast Guard actually stopped a commercial vessel, surrounded it, boarded it, and inspected it while being supported by the Chinese Navy. So this is just another escalation into this gray zone area of what legal authority do they have in these waters to use their Coast Guard assets in a naval exercise to stop civilian fishing, in this case, fishing and shipping. But let's pause for a second because I have to give a lot of credit here. I've spent a lot of time reading analysis and reports and articles from CSIS. This is the Center for Strategic and International Studies. A lot of these reports come from the team around Bonny Lin, who is the director of the China Power Project and a senior fellow for Asian security at CSIS. So all credit to her and her team. The analysis that they have is great. So I'm adding links to the description of this video to go to csis.org, read their articles. They go into much more depth than I have time to go into in this video. And I also must say, this is going to be my opinion and my analysis of the situation. Any mistakes that I make are my own, not CSIS in any way. I'm not affiliated with CSIS in any way. But they have some great graphics like this one that I would like to talk about. This is Taiwan. You can see here there are 6 major ports that go into Taiwan. 2 of them are very large, one all the way up the north, one down in the south. The values you see on the screen are the value of annual shipping in billions of dollars going into Taiwan. So you can see 2 major ports really support the country in terms of, naval shipping and deliveries and stuff. And then they have smaller ports around the side that are important, but if one were to say do a blockade, you wouldn't necessarily have to blockade every single port to have a significant negative impact on Taiwanese economy. You could do the 2 in the north or just one in the south. And what if you didn't call it a blockade? Or, and this is where I kind of defer from my CSIS analysis over there, what if it's not even a quarantine? What if it's simply a customs and legal action or enhanced customs inspections from China to delay instead of stopping shipping into these ports? So in SWORD 2024, we saw the practice of a Chinese Coast Guard ship actually doing one of these inspections, if you will, of a small Chinese flagged fishing vessel. We're going to take a moment here to watch a short and edited version of a Chinese media video they recorded during the recent joint SWORD operation. This part is the Chinese Coast Guard boarding and inspecting a vessel during the exercise. Let's go ahead and watch. All right, here we go. So this is Fleet 2304. It's just one of their many Coast Guard fleets. This is the fleet that was in operation during the joint SWORD exercise. Notice there's no PLAN ships anywhere in the picture. This is how it's going to happen. It's simply a Coast Guard customs inspection operation. I will be editing this for time. All right, so here we're on the bridge of the Chinese Coast Guard vessel. They're calling away the combat alert drill. This is the same as battle stations here in the United States. Fall in. I like to draw. So everyone's at their battle stations now. He's getting a call from his mom. He says, I told you not to call me. He hangs up. That's very rude. Don't do that to your mom. So the ship is intercepting a fishing vessel during this exercise. There it is. It looks like a fishing dhow. This is a Chinese flagship that they're coming up on. They turn on the fire hose there to imply that they're going to use the water cannon on the ship if it doesn't comply with the orders to stop and be inspected. Here's the boarding party getting ready. So here the ship has stopped and complied. Again, it's a Chinese fishing vessel, so not a lot of drama here. So here they are surrounding the fishing vessel. They're doing an inspection visually to make sure that there's no weapons on board pointed at them. They're not walking into an ambush. And then only one of those 2 vessels will go on board while the other one keeps perimeter security. Notice again, there's no naval units at all anywhere on the horizon. And again, this is from cgtn.com. That's a Chinese media outlet. All right, so let's take a moment to talk about how this might happen. In the past, on this channel, I've talked about the possibility of a Chinese invasion of Taiwan, which would be very messy for everybody and end up with maybe no winners at the end of that. Or a less dynamic campaign where China announces a blockade of Taiwan to force them to submit to Chinese rule and come back into the fold from the Chinese perspective was a possibility. They could also do a soft blockade where they don't announce anything, they just stop ships. Or they could do something a little more gray zone like this, where there's some legal ambiguity between what is a legal naval operation by a Coast Guard and a military operation by a Chinese Navy. And it's in that gray zone that I think they're going to try and operate, using examples that they saw have some success in the past. Russia was great at manipulating and using gray zone type offenses in countries around the Black Sea in the 2000s, including the complete seizure of the Crimean Peninsula in 2014. That worked for them. China may try something like that, because when shots are being fired, as we're seeing now in Ukraine, then it really hits the wall. There's no victory for anybody at that point, and it just drags on and on and on. I think China's going to try and avoid that by using gray zone style naval operations. And they've really put themselves in a position to do this since 2021, giving their Coast Guard legal authority to stop vessels with the use of force. All right, so how this works, in my opinion, China will first announce enhanced custom inspections for all cargo and tanker vessels going into Taiwan. So you'll have to, these shipping companies will have to file advanced custom declarations for their ships and their cargo and their crew with China and get approval before they can finish their passage or even begin their passage to Taiwan. Now, at that point, if everyone complies, that could severely reduce the amount of shipping going into Taiwan. I think, much like we're seeing in the Red Sea, a lot of shipping companies will go to other markets or go around the problem and not support or deliver anything to Taiwan if they have to go through a process like this. And because China controls the customs declarations, they can deny as many deliveries as they choose under this legal framework, under this customs inspection framework. But the Chinese Coast Guard is authorized to board vessels that do not comply. Let's say in the first week or longer, vessels who were already underway get the surprise announcement and do not comply. They continue into the ports anyway and are confronted with the Chinese Coast Guard. Coast Guard can interview those members, stop the ship, inspect the cargo, and then expel that ship from Chinese waters. This customs inspection is supported by the PLAN on outer pickets that you see here in the red circles. So this is not a naval operation. Legally, this is a Coast Guard operation forcing customs inspections on shipping, which is common for shipping going to and from ports in any country. That's not illegal at all. What is the gray zone area is now we have Taiwan, who China says is part of China. Therefore, they have the legal authority to enforce customs inspections to Taiwan. Obviously, Taiwan's a big island. There's no way, even with the 150 seafaring ships the Chinese Coast Guard has, could they maintain this type of blockade or inspections, if you will, around the whole island indefinitely. But they have what's called a maritime militia. A maritime militia is a force of thousands of ships that are paid fishermen who are paid to go to wherever they're told to go, drop anchor, and sit there. We've seen this for many years in the South China Sea. A lot of times those fishermen don't even bother fishing, and in some cases are not allowed to fish while they're doing these operations. And if they stay at anchor where they're told for long enough during the year, they get a stipend from the Chinese government that pays for them not to fish. But they're useful as civilian observers, so that in the gaps between the Chinese Coast Guard inspection areas around Taiwan, you'll have this militia, this maritime militia, watching for ships trying to avoid these inspections. So with the combination of that large militia and the many ships that the largest Coast Guard in the world has, they could definitely support an operation like this, probably indefinitely, because they're so close to their home ports. They could cycle ships out as long as they need to. And the Chinese Navy could support them operationally from afar, hundreds to 200 miles away from Taiwan, with sensor support, communication support, and not be directly involved. You'll never see a PLAN ship involved in the stop, and seizure of a vessel and turning away of a vessel. That's not going to happen. But they'll provide the Coast Guard with the information they need of shipping in the area and keep an eye out for other foreign military vessels who may come into conflict. In other words, the Chinese Coast Guard would have a large warning that there may be a conflict coming up because someone's doing a freedom of navigation passage in the Taiwan Strait. This or a similar scenario has been legally prepared by China. Now we'll wait to see what China does with this new customs inspection type authority. My question to you is, how will the world react to this? Is this even legal? Where does the Chinese maritime jurisdiction begin and end for its Coast Guard? Because China didn't define it, and there's nothing in the international laws that defines it outside of China's 12-mile limit. So again, I want to thank CSIS for their very detailed analysis on this. I would encourage everyone to go read their opinions because they do this full time. If you want to know more about Chinese ships and their capability, I have a great video right here you can watch about that. Thanks for watching, everybody. Have a great one.